Recording in progress.
All right. This week, Parshas Pinchas. As in every Torah portion, there's so many things to pick up on. So we'll pick up on one of the points in this week's Torah portion, which really highlights uh, the value of Jewish women and how much there is to learn from Jewish women throughout history and what they represent. And this week's Torah portion has to come in. Well, um, speaking about the Jewish people were at nearing the end of their 40 years in the desert, and they know that they're going now into the land of Israel. They're going to the land of Israel, and so the land is going to be split up according to every family is going to have their portion in the land. Um, and then the laws of inheritance, as the Torah has it, is that it is a if someone passes, then his inheritance goes on to his to his male offspring. And there was a man whose name was Tzlafchad, and he had five daughters who were known to be especially wise. And he didn't have any sons though. And so they went to Moshe and they asked what's going to be, they actually demanded what's going to be with their portion in the land of Israel. So that's our entry point from this week's Torah portion into this fascinating topic. Um, Alan, if you'd like to read this over here, this is from this week's Torah portion.
With my phone. Let me see if I can read this. Okay, hold on.
I could give you smaller parts if you'd like.
And the daughters of Zelchad came forward. These were the names of his daughters: Machia,
Machla,
Noah,
Noah,
Shagala,
Hagla,
Milcah.
Milcah, and Tirza.
All right, well, go ahead. Keep reading it.
You're good. Okay, go on.
They stood before Moshe, before Eleazar the Kohen, before the leaders, and before the entire congregation of the entrance of the tabernacle, saying, "Our father died in the wilderness. He was not strong among the group. They gathered against God with Korach's assembly, but died for his own sin, and he had no sons. Why should father's name be diminished from among his? I'm losing this. Hold on. Among his family, simply because he had no son. Give us a possession among our father's brothers." Moshe brought the case before God and said to Moshe, "The daughters of Zelahad are speaking correctly. You shall surely give them an inherited portion among their father's brothers, and you shall transfer their father's inheritance to them. And to the children of Israel you shall speak, saying, if a man dies and has no son, you shall transfer his inheritance to his daughter."
It goes on with the whole story, all the laws of inheritance as they go. Um, and this is one of the few instances you have in the Torah which a law wasn't given by God directly, but rather came in response to a request of of a person. In this case, the doors of Salafchot. So that's something which they really have this great merit. As the sages say, that it really could have just been God saying to Moses, but they were worthy in their own right, in their own merit, that this portion of the Torah should be given through them. There's something greater, something else just going on over here, which is you see what were they requesting? They were requesting a portion in the land of Israel, and that is because they had a very special connection to that. Um, let's see over here. We'll bring from the Medrash over here. Rabbi Nassan said, Scripture comes to teach us that the strength of the woman in that generation was greater than that of the men. The men said, let us make a leader and return to Egypt. And the woman said, give us a holding in the land. So the men said, when they were scared off, they said, oh, let's go back to Egypt. Let's go back to be slaves. And the women were excited to have a portion in the land of Israel, didn't want to give up that merit, that opportunity. And so this is our entry point into this wonderful topic of women in Judaism. And it's a topic which has so much to discover of the role of women in Judaism. We'll touch on that, and we'll also be learning lessons from some special women throughout history. But first, if everyone could take a moment, I guess we'll go around with two questions. First of all, who would you say, if there's one woman from Jewish history who you think can teach us a lesson, who would that be?
Golda Meir.
Golda Meir. Which lesson would you like to learn from her? What do you think is the lesson to learn from her?
Strength, confidence, wisdom, bravery, anything you can think of like that.
For sure. Yes, definitely. She was an immensely powerful, strong woman, a great leader. Reuven, what's your thought? One woman we could
Or,
learn from in Jewish history.
huh?
Reuben, do we have you?
I can't, I'm here,
Hmm?
I'm here, but I'm not hearing. Oh,
Oh,
Okay. Alan, you're up.
I'm up. Well, I don't know. She didn't start out as one, but can you say Ruth?
Ruth, yes. There's a lot to learn from her. What would you say is the lesson to learn from her?
Well, compassion. She wouldn't leave her in times of trouble. She wouldn't. She stayed with her mother-in-law even though the husband died, and just very compassion, strength. That's
She
it.
is the greatest example who gave up literally everything. Someone who gave up everything in her life just in order to follow what she knew was right. Right?
Yes.
I think that's definitely a great lesson, something which we can all learn from. And so this is Judaism putting an emphasis on the special qualities of women actually goes back to the very foundation of our people, even before the giving of the Torah. Let's read some verses over here. Reuben, if you'd like to read this.
you shall say, I'm sorry,
I guess. Here they are.
Reuben, you want to read it?
you shall be saved in the house of God. These are the ones who shall be in the world. Those are the wild and those because they are the complete record. In other words, they, Lord, they should God involved with that.
So God tells Moshe to prepare the nation, tells Moses, prepare the nation for receiving the Torah. Tell them the background, why they're being chosen. You saw everything that I did in Egypt, and now you should prepare yourself, and tell them some of the laws in preparation for the revelation of Mount Sinai. And God says first the women are mentioned, and then the men. And so there's a few reasons. One of them is because women are quicker to fulfill the mitzvahs. Another is that they are the ones who will be guiding their children towards the Torah. And a third reason, which the Medrash says, is it is fitting that the women are addressed first in the command because the men are drawn after them. So they basically set the standard of what's going to be done in the house. And hmm, what was that, Ruben?
It just, it just what the hard,
I'm having a very hard time hearing you, Ruben.
I don't know.
Hmm? I'm sorry, I really your sound quality is very, for some reason, very hard to hear.
Let let me, let me, well,
Are you on two different, do you have two different windows open with Zoom in it? Maybe close one of them. That might be part of the issue because it could be canceling out the sound because it's picking it up from two different locations. I see you're on double. Let me try to mute one of them. Try to talk now. Ruben, what were you saying?
I'm saying let me just squat, because I'm having trouble having, hearing some of the so.
You're a little bit better. We can actually hear you a bit better now. Um, but we'll go on. So there's speaking about the values and what to learn from Jewish women and what the special values are. It says actually in the book of Mishlei. Mishlei is Proverbs, written by King Solomon. He has an entire chapter right towards the end, a chapter called Eshet Chayil, or a woman of valor. There's much discussion. Who is this woman of valor who King Solomon is praising? Some say the tradition has it that it's about his mother, Bathsheba, who was the queen to King David. Others say that it was actually he's speaking about Abraham. Maybe Abraham even composed it about his wife Sarah. Um, I always thought it was about my mother. Um, but this is a chapter. This poem is recited in Jewish tradition every Friday night before the Kiddush. We recite it. We recite this. So I'll just read a couple of verses over here, which speaks so beautifully about a woman of valor. What is she? Here, Jill, if you'd like to read this.
A woman of valor who can find? Her worth is far beyond pearls. Her husband places his confidence in her and lacks nothing good. Give her the fruit of her hands and let her deeds praise her in the gates.
But this is just the beginning and the end, and there's a lot more in between. So these are traits which were unique to whoever you had specifically in mind, but also you can find it in general in Jewish women. In general, women, you find many of these beautiful traits, and there are some things over here which men should be learning from too. And so, even though naturally some of these beautiful characteristics, these feminine characteristics, are to be lauded, are especially pronounced in women, but men can definitely try to learn from those important people, obviously, and to learn from these characteristics. And that's what we're going to try to do. Um, and if you look at it actually in a very broad sense, our relationship to God is oftentimes called that God is like the bridegroom and the Jewish nation is like his bride. For example, at the giving of the Torah, it's described as a groom coming out to greet his bride. And that was, so to speak, our marriage to God. So these qualities are definitely things which relate to all of us. Um, And for that matter, also, this poem of Eshes Chayil is at times the woman of valor can also be meant, much of it can be applied to the Torah. Indeed, Rashi says, Eshes Chayil, the woman of valor, refers to the Torah. This whole poem is speaking about the Torah. So all these qualities are speaking about the Torah as well, meaning it's speaking on many different levels, but these are things which are not unique to this one or two women who King Solomon had in mind, but definitely things you can all try to emulate. Um, So let's take another moment to pause. I guess we can each share what's one feminine quality that you think is one which we can learn and try to that we should try to emulate. Something which women throughout history have um, especially lived up to in a stronger sense.
Hmm. And putting family first.
Family first, beautiful. And men oftentimes, unfortunately, put family last. And sometimes we can use a reminder. Jill, what would you say?
It's hard to pick, but I would probably say empathy.
Empathy. Empathy is great. Yes. Empathy is so important. Um, Reuven, do you have one to say as well? Do you have one to share?
The woman,
Hmm?
as I said, just let me, just let me watch. Okay. If I'm having trouble figuring out keeping you up,
Okay.
right?
All right, we'll leave it at that. We'll let you enjoy it. Okay. Um, I mean, indeed, the Kabbalists definitely see a distinct two forms of souls as the masculine and feminine, and although there's definitely overlap between the two, but they say that the ultimate is when you have completion, meaning everyone has their natural characteristics, they're inborn to them, but the ultimate is you when you incorporate everything what could be learned from others, both what you're naturally born with, but also what is new to you, make that second nature, and then you can be truly whole. Um, and that's also part of why a person that's part of the completion that a person has through marriage is that a single household can have both a husband and a wife, both a man and a woman in it. But in each individual, we try to have both is also essential. And so we'll focus on the first trait which we're going to focus on of a number is going to be the trait of faith, which is something which is so foundational, essential to Jewish belief. Um, and so let's read 1 second right over here. We'll be speaking about faith and the Jewish heroine, which we'll be focusing on is Miriam, the older sister of Moses and Aaron. Okay. So Alan, if you'd like to read this.
Okay. Rav Avira taught, in the merit of the righteous women of that generation, the Jewish people were redeemed from Egypt. He describes their righteous deeds. They would bring food to their husbands in the field, bathe them, anoint them with oil, feed them, give them to drink, and bond with them.
If you think about what Jewish life was like in Egypt, and that was the lowest, or maybe one of the lowest, definitely one of the lowest points in Jewish history. We were literally enslaved, and there was enslaved in a superpower, and there was no future. There was no way out. Didn't seem like there's any way out. We had a promise that we're going to be redeemed, but it didn't seem possible. And many would have lost their faith, and many probably did lose their faith. But the women in that generation, they had faith that the day will come they'll leave, and therefore they ensured too that there should be a next generation and to raise that next generation, and they kept up their spirit and their humanity, not just for themselves but for their husbands as well. Even though they went through the backbreaking labor just as much, if not more, than their husbands, and they didn't let that hurt their faith. Um, And so one of the people who most exemplify that was Moses' sister, who was Miriam. She was the oldest in the family, and Pharaoh had decreed, knowing his stargazers, his fortune tellers had told him there's going to be a redeemer for the Jewish nation, and Pharaoh was very paranoid, and so he decreed that any new baby boy should be thrown into the river. Well, what did people do? Many did what would only make sense, which is went through a divorce. Because why are we bringing children into this world if they will immediately be put to death? And Miriam stood up. So let's read that, Jill, if you'd like to read this over here from the Talmud.
A sage teaches Amram, the father of Moshe, was the leader of his generation. Once he saw that Pharaoh had decreed, every son that is born you shall cast into the river. He said, we are laboring in vain. He arose and divorced his wife, and all others followed his example. His daughter Miriam said to him, Father, your decree is harsher than Pharaoh's. Pharaoh decreed only regarding the males, but you decreed upon both males and females. Pharaoh decreed only in this world, but you decreed in this world and in the world to come. Listening to his daughter, he remarried his wife, and the others did the same.
But just on a side note, just one thing that you see from here, how the Talmud is saying how Miriam said that you're decreeing also in the world, you're decreeing that the children who are born won't have a life, not in this world or in the world to come. What we see is that even a moment that's spent in this world is already enough for a child to merit to the world to come. Of course, if one does good deeds throughout their life, they merit a greater share in the world to come. But even just the very fact that a child was brought into this world is already giving them a share, not just giving them bringing them to the world to come as well. But what we see over here from Miriam is that she believed in the future and she wasn't scared. And this as a 5-year-old child, she wasn't scared. She wasn't scared off by these harsh decrees. And this is something which was consistent to her 80 years later. So now she's 85, 86 years old. And the Jewish people are redeemed from Egypt with Moses, her little baby brother, her 5 years younger, and Aaron, the middle brother, the middle sibling, who was 2 years younger than her. She's 85. Aaron is 83, and Moses is 80 when the Jewish people left Egypt. And after leaving Egypt, the Egyptians chased after them. And the 7 days later, God splits the Red Sea, the Sea of Reeds, and the Jewish people come across, and then the Egyptians are drowned in the sea, as we all know the story. What do the Jewish people do afterwards? Well, Moses leads everyone in a song, and the whole Jewish people sing together. How do they all know how they sing together? If the lyrics weren't composed before, well, somehow they all have that intuition to all sing the same song. But what's unique is that that Miriam actually led all the women in song and dance. And let's see how the verse describes it. Miriam the prophetess, Aaron's sister, took a timbrel in her hand, and all the women came out after her with timbrels and with dances. They all have these timbrels, these tambourines. Why did they have it? Where did they get them from? These instruments. Say the commentators that, we'll read it from Rashi over here, the righteous women of that generation were confident that God would perform miracles for them, and they had accordingly brought timbrels with them from Egypt. So they knew, even in the depths of slavery, that redemption would come. Even in the hardest times, they knew there's going to be a beautiful future. And that's something which you can all learn from them, is feminine faith and steadfastness. which doesn't mean people oftentimes will say someone has faith as a negative thing, especially nowadays where there's so much knowledge. People look at faith as a negative, but we look at it as indeed the greatest positive because it gives you that strength, that it gives you that focus of the clarity of vision for a future on the firstly, most importantly, but also it gives you that hope even when others might lose hope, and it's something which helps you persevere even in the hardest of times. And this is something which expressed itself also just a few weeks later. The Jewish people received the Ten Commandments at Mount Sinai. As I mentioned earlier, what happened after that? Moses went up to the mountain. 40 days later, and he still hadn't come down. He was supposed to come down after 40 days. The Jewish people had done a miscount. They counted the days wrongly. Anyway, be it as it may, what did they do? They made a golden calf, but not everyone was in on this. It says in Or Torah that the women did not want to give their jewelry for the calf, for within them the knowledge that I am God in the midst of the earth is stronger. They had this constant perception that God is always with them. So even though maybe there might have been a convincing argument to give up, they didn't give up. And this continued also throughout the Jewish people, their time in the desert, which was really our formative years as a nation. That also when the spies came back with the beautiful report of the land of Israel, but also a very harsh report, a scattering report saying that we're never going to be able to conquer. Well, all the men were crying that we have no chance against them, and the women didn't take part in this. Why? Because they still believed. Indeed, the Kli Yakar says, one of the commentaries says that it actually would have been better. Maybe it would have been a good idea to send women as spies, to send women as the scouts, because they would have come back with a better report, with a report which would be more encouraging to the nation. Now, this is something which happened in our most formative time as a nation, which is the Jewish people leaving Israel in the desert. But this is also something which continues even looking towards the future. Says the Yalkut Shimoni that the generations are only redeemed in the merit of the righteous woman of that generation. Meaning the coming of the Mashiach, of the ultimate redemption, will be in the merit of those who have faith in God, that he will bring the redemption, especially the righteous woman, who just like they had faith in Egypt, so too they have faith now. They have faith now, and that is why very soon Mashiach will come and redeem the world because of in the merit of that faith. That faith meaning that certainty that God's reality can't fully be captured by logic. That knowledge that we have absolute clarity, this is what's going to be, even if at times it's beyond what we understand. So one way to describe faith is like someone can describe to you something, you could draw a mental picture of it, but that still can't compare to having seen it with your own eyes, right? Nowadays, I don't know if any of you play with AI. Anyone plays with AI a lot? With the chatbots?
Oh,
If you do, you'll know that you can describe any scene, and they can within a few seconds, you'll have a picture of exactly that scene, even the most impossible thing. But what you could do, no matter how much description you'll give it to them, it's not very likely that they'll get to the exact same scene that you're actually seeing. Why? Because when you see it with your eyes, you have clarity on the details, and you also have absolute certainty that this is a reality. And that's something so it doesn't replace knowledge, it doesn't replace intellect, it complements it, and it gives us a much stronger focus. And that's something which is especially pronounced by women. Because women are more spiritually attuned naturally than men. Have a stronger spiritual sensitivity, which you can speak of. There's much more to discuss about this, about why that is the case. But that's as we've seen throughout the ages, throughout Jewish teachings, that women have a stronger spiritual sensitivity, and so it goes all the way back to the very first Jewish woman. Who was the first Jewish woman?
Eve?
Eve?
Eve wasn't Jewish.
Eve?
Eve was not Jewish.
Oh.
Who was the first Jewish woman?
Hmm.
Who was the first Jew?
Moses?
Abraham?
Abraham.
Moses and Abraham, both are correct. Abraham and Sarah were the first Jews. But the Jewish people only fully became a nation at Mount Sinai, at which point not just Moses himself, but all those who were at Sinai became members of a fully developed Jewish nation. Abraham was the prototype Jew. And in a certain sense, the Jewish story begins with Abraham. So we could at times we generally will refer to Abraham and Sarah as the first Jews. Abraham specifically as the first Jew because I believe his experience as being separate, different than everyone else, began before his marriage to Sarah. But you would think that Abraham is so famous, he was the greatest of his times. But God said to Abraham, God said to Abraham, whatever Sarah tells you, do as she says. And Rashi explains, it teaches us that Abraham was lesser than Sarah in matters of prophecy. Listen to your wife. Yeah, and not just because she might be smarter than you, but also because she has, when you're a prophet and your wife's a prophet, you should also listen to her. Why? Because she's more spiritually attuned. Her prophecy is more online, more instinctive. And channeling that to nowadays, when you're thinking about what does it mean to be a Jew nowadays and to live nowadays in the world that we see, and many of us are just looking at the moment and looking at the reality as we encounter it now. And this is a teaching of the Rebbe where he says that we need to take a lesson, look around at Jewish women who we know, and take a lesson from that. Jill, if you'd like to read this.
We can see that naturally Jewish women and girls often have a stronger, more instinctive sense that we need to leave exile immediately. They need far less convincing than men to feel that we must leave exile immediately.
Yes. And that's something which I gotta say I've encountered also a lot. In conversation, it's definitely something which comes up, and you definitely see that, I mean, so often we see people who are not, it's not very hard to tell someone that what we need to change the reality better. We need the world to come to be a transformed world, the coming of Mashiach. But definitely, when speaking, women are definitely much more in tune with that, and their stronger faith and spiritual connection actually leads to a very important aspect of Judaism, which is that Judaism, Jewish identity, goes after the mother, right? If someone's mother is Jewish, then they're fully Jewish, and if not, then they're not Jewish. They could undergo a conversion, become Jewish, but it goes 100% after the mother. Why is that? Well, you think about what do each of the parents give to a child, and the most formative education, the foundation of that which transcends logic is in most instances passed on by the mother in those very first in the first few years. So this is again from the Rebbe. There's a general virtue that women possess in relation to men in the service of God. We see that among women, faith and awe of God are more openly revealed, because faith shines within them in a way that reflects its source, as it comes from the Holy One, blessed be He. Perhaps it may be suggested that this is also why Jewish identity is determined specifically through the mother. The very essence and totality of being part of Israel, the Jewish nation, depends on the mother, such that one born to a Jewish mother is considered Jewish even if the father is not. Only the particular details and distinctions among the Jewish people themselves, whether one's a Kohen, a Levite, or Israel, which tribe one belongs to, etc., depend on the father's family line. But the identity as a Jew depends on the mother. Why? Because the mother because the faith of woman is stronger and in a more revealed sense, in a more obvious way. Now, this does not mean that a strong faith is unique to woman. Rather, it's something which all of us can work on. Faith is something which actually shares a root word with the word uman, which is similar to emunah, means a craftsman. A craftsman isn't born good at his job. He becomes good after investing many hours into it. What do they say? Something about 10,000 hours, right? If you want to get really good at something, right? I think they say something like that. More time you invest in something, the better you become. So seeking God in our daily life, seeing godliness, seeing holiness in our daily life is definitely going to develop this characteristic in each of us, but it's something which we see especially naturally in the feminine nature. Okay, so that's one Jewish trait which we spoke about, which is faith. One trait which is especially pronounced by Jewish women, and we took insight for inspiration from the Jewish women who lived in the land of Egypt in exile, and those who were in the desert, and also from Miriam herself, the sister of Moses and Aaron, who might be less heard of, but she was someone who was a very core figure in the Jewish story. Now I'll move on to another profound, beautiful quality, which we have with Jewish women, and that is that of wisdom or intuition. Right. And so here we'll take inspiration from two relatively famous, though not maybe of the most famous figures in Jewish history, Sarah and Beruria. Anyone heard of either of them? Sarah was Yaakov Avinu's, our forefather Jacob's granddaughter, from maybe his oldest or one of his oldest granddaughters, and Beruria was the wife of the great Talmudic sage Rabbi Meir, and she herself is also quoted in the Talmud regarding to certain laws. And so we'll see what we can learn from them about wisdom and intuition. And again, turning to that fundamental poem about the Jewish woman, the ode to a Jewish woman, the ode to the woman of valor, Eishes Chayil Miyimtza, and this verse says, Pia pascha v'chachma v'soras chesed al lashona. Her mouth is full of wisdom, her tongue with kindly teaching. Now, when you speak of wisdom, there are different aspects in the mind. The Kabbalists speak about the mind can be split into three. There's a chachma, bina, das. Chachma is the spark of inspiration. Bina is taking things to their full breadth, seeing things in full context. So developing that spark, maybe taking as more, not just as a momentary inspiration, but actually channeling it, or in life, seeing things in their full context, having a broader understanding, and that's its practical application of the thought, that it shouldn't just stay as a thought, but it should be channeled into an emotion, into an action. And what we see by women, especially this intuition, is especially pronounced in what's called bina, or understanding, which is where you see the full breadth of the picture. So the first one we'll look at is Sarah, daughter of Asher. Jacob, our forefather, had a son named Asher. This Asher had a daughter. Name was Sarah. When she come into play? Well, as the Torah tells the story, Yosef was 17 years old, his father's favorite son, and his brothers sold him off into slavery because they were jealous of him. They sold him off. He ended up in Egypt, and ultimately he became the viceroy of Egypt, running the country. There was a famine, and so the brothers went down to Egypt, and Yosef revealed himself to the brothers, and he said, "Go tell my father that Yosef is still alive and he is the ruler of Egypt." What are they going to do? They're going to go to Yaakov and tell him, "Your favorite son Joseph, he's still alive. He rules in Egypt. Yaakov is going to have a heart attack on the spot. No way he's going to survive that." So they're trying to figure out how to do it. Asher's daughter, who evidently had a deep intuition into what was needed, she said, let me handle this. She took her harp and sat down next to her grandfather and began to play a song. And gently, as the song was going along, she started dropping hints that Yosef is still alive. And then until she gave Yaakov the news, and she repeated it over and over again in her song, letting the message be carried through the music. And that's how Yaakov became filled with joy, and the Spirit of God rested on him. And he understood what she said was true. Now, the Sefer HaYashar actually describes what the thought process was over there. So Yosef finished giving instructions and turned back to Egypt, while the sons of Yaakov traveled to Canaan with joy to see their father. As they reached the border of the land, they said to one another, "What shall we do regarding this matter? If we come upon him suddenly and tell him the news, he will be greatly terrified and will refuse to listen to us." They continued until they drew near their homes and found Sarah, daughter of Asher, coming out to meet them. The girl was exceedingly good and wise, and she knew how to play the harp. She took the harp, hurried ahead of them, and sat beside Yaakov. She played and said with the sweetness of her words, "My uncle Yosef is alive. He rules over all the land of Egypt. He is not dead." She continued to play and speak these words, and Yaakov heard, and they were sweet to him. As he heard her speak them a second and third time, joy entered Yaakov's heart through the beauty of her words. The Spirit of God rested upon him, and he knew that all her words were true. Did she do anything revolutionary? She didn't say anything that anyone else couldn't have said. But it's not just about what you say, it's about how you say it. And when you truly understand the task at hand, then then you'll ensure that it's actually transmitted in the best way possible, in the proper way, in a way that it could be received and received by its intended recipient. And that's something which Sarah had in her, that she had that deeper understanding. I guess as Jill was saying, it's similar. You were saying empathy, and empathy is true. I think this is a bit of a different point than empathy. But it's an understanding of the human of understanding someone else's emotions. So, try putting yourself into someone else's shoes, and based on that, she was able to transmit this information. And there's a time later where she did something else, which I think could actually, fascinating story, which maybe is the foundation of any sort of negotiations nowadays. Negotiators, these hostage negotiators and the like, they could turn back to this story of Sarah that I'll say in a moment, and take insight from there, because it really shows about how you can extricate yourself, work out very sticky situations. So tradition has that Sarah lived exceedingly long. Why? Because Jacob blessed her, gave her a blessing, because of how because of her bringing him the news that Yosef was still alive, and how he brought her the news, he gave her a blessing for a long life. She lived exceedingly long. Tradition has it she was still alive in the times of King David. And in the days of King David, a man named Sheva ben Bichri rebelled against the king and took refuge in the city of Abel. So Yoav, who was King David's general, he was a fighter, and he was, by the way, a great Torah scholar. So he wasn't all out for war. But when the times demanded it, you have a traitor over here. So you had to go to war. Didn't have another option, and he was ready to wipe out the city, to drop a bomb on them, to carpet bomb the city. So what happened? Sarah, who was at that point very old and well respected for her wisdom, she raised her voice above the noise of the siege and called out for Yoav to be brought to her. When he approached, she challenged him directly. She told him, "Are you truly Yoav, the man known for his wisdom? Haven't you read the Torah? It commands that when you approach a city for war, you first have to call out it for peace. Why do you seek to destroy the heritage of God?" Yoav was taken aback. "Far be it from me to destroy," he answered. "I seek only one man, Sheva ben Bichri, who has rebelled against the king. Deliver him to me, and I will withdraw." Sarah assured him that peace would be arranged. She then turned to the people of the city and proceeded with remarkable strategic wisdom. Rather than immediately revealing the full terms, she first impressed upon them the gravity of the threat. "Yoav and all of Israel are prepared to destroy us. He says he will leave only if we hand over 100 men." Terrified, the people agreed. She returned and said his demand had softened to 50. They agreed again. Finally, she revealed the true and only demand, the one fugitive, Sheva ben Bichri. Relieved beyond measure, the people killed Sheva and handed him over. Yoav sounded the shofar, the siege was lifted, and the city was saved. Not by weapons, by the wisdom of one woman. As King Shlomo later wrote, "Wisdom is better than weapons of war." Right? Quite a story, and definitely shows you how trying to accomplish things by force many times will not be the most effective way. And using a bissel seichel, using your mind, and using understanding, putting yourself into the thought process of the other person is the best way to change them, to change their mind, and to impact and influence them to win them over to your side. Okay, so that's the story of Sarah, and definitely a lot to be learned from there. And then another example, the second one we'll speak about, is about Bruria. Quite a scholar, her teachings are cited in the Talmud. She mastered in one day 300 teachings. But more than her knowledge, what really set her apart was her insight, her insight into the human psyche, to see beneath us, to see under the surface, see what's really going on. So, for example, there was once a group of ruffians who were harassing her husband, Rabbi Meir, and he wished to pray for their death. And his wife told him, she corrected him. She said that the verse doesn't say that sinners should perish. Rather, it says sins should perish, implying that the sinners themselves don't need to perish along with their sins. Rather, they can be transformed. And so, Rabbi Meir, what did he do? Instead of praying for those who are making him tzaddis, that they should be taken out, instead he prayed that they should repent, and indeed his prayers worked, and they repented, their sins perished, and they lived on and lived a better life. And then there's another story, a story of the Talmud, which the story which the Talmud brings, that one Shabbat afternoon, one Shabbos afternoon, while Rabbi Meir was teaching, both of Bruria's sons suddenly died. She placed them on a bed and covered them with a sheet, waiting for her husband to return. Trying to think of what she had to go through, thinking about how to break the news to her husband. When Rabbi Meir came home after Shabbos, he asked where the children were. She told him they had stepped out and would return shortly. After Havdalah, when he asked again, she gave the same gentle answer. I guess on Shabbos she definitely didn't want to dampen his mood. Shabbat is not meant to be a day of sadness, and if there's no reason to bring sadness, it wouldn't help anyone if he would know about the sad news. On the Shabbos, she waited until after, and after Havdalah, and after the meal, after Havdalah, which is the ending of the spirit of Shabbos. And then after the meal, she turned to him and asked a quiet question. This morning, someone left something precious with me for safekeeping. Now he has come to take it back. Must I return it? Of course, Rabbi Meir answered. It belongs to its owner. Then I'll return it, she said, because you have said so. She took him by the hand, led him upstairs, and uncovered the sheet. When Rabbi Meir saw his two sons lying there, he broke down in tears. My children, my teachers, my teachers, my teachers. My sons in the way of the world, my teachers, because they would enlighten my eyes with the Torah. Bruriah placed her hand on his shoulder. Did you not just tell me that we must return what was entrusted to us? Rabbi Meir recognized the truth in her words and said, God gave and God has taken, may God's name be blessed. Seeing how she had fought the strength and the wisdom, seeing how she had found the strength and the wisdom to comfort her husband, even in her own grief, Rabbi Hanina exclaimed the words of King Solomon, Ish eschayel miyimta, a woman of valor who can find. So this is something which you had deeper understanding of humanity, of the human psyche, and the seeing things for the full picture, and not jumping into their understanding of the moment, but seeing something deeper is what we call bina. Bina is understanding, and the Talmud says that the Holy One, blessed be He, granted a woman a greater measure of insight, bina, than a man. And this is why Elijah the prophet, he was asked how a woman helps her husband. And this is what he answered. Jill, if you'd like to read this.
Rabbi Yossi encountered Elijah the prophet and asked, it is written, I will make him a helpmate. In what manner does a woman help a man? Elijah answered. When a man brings wheat from the field, does he chew raw wheat? When he brings home flax, does he wear unprocessed flax? It is his wife who transforms these raw materials into bread and clothing. Is she not then the one who lights up his eyes and stands him on his feet?
And so what Elijah is saying here, as much of what he would say, and as much of what you see in Jewish teachings, he's not just speaking in a literal sense, which is that definitely in those days, the husband would bring home the raw material, and the wife would turn it into food. But on a deeper sense, also, especially on a deeper sense, see what he's saying is that you have these two. There's different aspects of understanding of knowledge. And what men were especially have in a stronger measure might be an insight, not insight, I should say, the new sparks of wisdom, maybe, but actually channeling that into something which is usable, That's something which you have much more in women. And that's why specifically the two together, that's taking that flash of inspiration, the beginning of an idea, and not leaving it with that, but actually making something of it is what the husband and wife can develop together. And of course, as so much else that we've been speaking about, these are things which are generalizations, and I wouldn't say no two people are unique. And also, these are all things which we can all try to learn from and to incorporate into our own life because they're also so essential. But especially, you'll find certain things you'll find in a stronger sense by men, and other things strong in a stronger sense by women. And specifically, this aspect of bina or insight says the Talmud is especially there by women. Um, and that's why what happens when one's wife when a husband loses his wife. Alan, if you'd like to read this.
Rabbi Alexandri says, for any man whose wife dies, his world is darkened. Rabbi Avahu says, his counsel falls.
So you can have all of the same inspiration, but without actually having that insight and channeling it into real world situations. Your counsel fall. You're missing the main thing. That's why what happened with Avraham, Abraham, our forefather, that as long as Sarah was alive, his inner strength was intact. He defeated kings, withstood trials, and led thousands. But after her passing, old age suddenly came over him. He became visibly diminished, turning to others for help and arranging even her burial. But this is, of course, something which, again, we can all try to develop. And now we'll speak about a third aspect, which we take from Jewish women throughout history, and this is woman as the foundation of the home, what's known as the Akarat Habayis. And to this, we'll turn to Hannah. Hannah, I guess in English it's Hannah, was the mother of Samuel. But before we get into who she was, we'll first speak to what we mean when we say the foundation of the Jewish home. Because we're not speaking about someone who's literally doing the laundry and making sure the floors are clean and cooking supper. The daily tasks are there. I mean, those are important, okay? But that's not what we speak about when we speak about the foundation of the home. Instead, we speak about the feminine wisdom. Says the Medrash, says the verse, says King Solomon, the wise woman build their homes. Chachmas nashim bansa besa. And it actually continues. The other second half of the verse is that a foolish woman can destroy the house too. As Rashi explained this, the wise woman build their homes, meaning that a home is sustained and endures through the woman. And not just in the literal sense, but in the spiritual sense as well, that the spiritual vitality and health of the home is especially dependent on the woman of the house. This is something, the example that the Medrash brings about this is that you had in the rebellion, the mutiny against Moses. So some of the main figures, Korach on the one hand, and On Ben Peles on the other hand. They were both of the leaders. Korach wanted to back out, and his wife convinced him into staying in the mutiny, and he met. I mean, he fell to his death, and he found his end. It didn't work out well for him. On Ben Peles was originally one of the leaders of the rebellion. His wife, on the other hand, she had an insight to see where he was going was wrong. She tried convincing him out of it, so that didn't work. And so she basically forcibly found ways to keep him in the tent, to keep him from being convinced to rejoin the rebellion. And that was why he survived. He lived on, and she's seen as a truly wise woman, one who ensured the spiritual health of her house. But the example we'll be focusing on over here is the example of Hannah. Hannah, her husband, was Elkanah. He was very well known throughout the land of Israel because every year, 3 times a year, Jewish people are commanded to go to the temple when it was in Jerusalem. In those days, it was actually before it was settled in Jerusalem. In those days, the tabernacle was in the city of Shiloh. And Elkanah was a leader of his time, of his era, and he would travel around the land of Israel, taking the longest route possible to get to the tabernacle. Why? Because along the way, he would stop many different towns, communities, villages, cities, and encourage others to join him on this pilgrimage, and that way, to encourage others to come. And his wife, of course, Hannah, was a deeply spiritual individual, a prophetess, and she would go along because she wanted to have a spiritual experience, of course, of going to the temple in Jerusalem. But Elkanah and Hannah were not blessed with a child. And so one time, as they went to sorry, not in Jerusalem, in Shiloh. One time, as they were at Shiloh, Hannah prayed for a son. A whole story in its own right. Hannah's prayer is a prototype prayer, which we follow now. The high priest thought she was drunk, but she was actually just praying from the heart, as one should. She was answered that she will have a son, not just any son, but her son will be a leader in the Jewish nation, and that son was Samuel, Shmuel. Shmuel, who is compared in value in holiness to Moses and Aaron together. If you put Moses and Aaron, bunch them together, Samuel is compared in greatness to the two of them. But Shmuel was born, and what did Hannah, instead of joining her husband Elkanah on the annual pilgrimage, Hannah said, "I'm not going to go this time because I have a child to raise over here. Yes, he could survive the trip, and yeah, it'll all be good, but." I have a child I need to take care of, and if it's going to hurt his education in any way, I'm willing to give up on my own spiritual heights in order to ensure that his education, as long as the travel is harsh for him, he doesn't need to undergo that. Okay, so here let's read the story of Hannah. Alan, if you'd like to read this.
Okay. There was a man from Ramathaim, Zophim, named Elkanah. He had two wives, Hannah and Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had none. Hannah rose after eating and drinking in Shiloh. Eli the priest was sitting by the doorpost of the temple, and in her deep distress she prayed for God and wept bitterly. She made a vow, O God of hosts, if you see my suffering and remember me, if you grant me a son, I will give him to God for all the days of his life, and no razor shall touch his head. In due time, Hannah conceived and gave birth to a son, whom she named Shmuel, saying, I asked him of God. When Elkanah went up with the entire household for the annual pilgrimage, Hannah did not go. She said to her husband, not until the boy is weaned, then I will bring him, so that he will appear before God and remain there forever.
And this was not easy, so we'll see again a teaching from the Rebbe over here. Jill, if you'd like to read this.
The Haftarah relates to how Elkanah assumed Hannah would accompany him to Shiloh, but Hannah said no, she would remain at home until the child was weaned. Hannah was a prophetess, as she mentioned at the conclusion of the Haftarah. She did not merely perceive godliness at Shiloh as ordinary people do. She saw it through the lens of prophecy, with the truest taste, the deepest understanding, and the greatest spiritual feeling possible. Yet the Haftarah records simply, and Elkanah understood this without argument, that Hannah determined that by remaining home for those 2 years, she could safeguard Shmuel's upbringing and education, at least a little more than she could while traveling, even if that journey led directly to the holy sanctuary of Shiloh.
Yes. So that was a sacrifice for her. But the sacrifice was well worth it for her because she saw that what's the greatest merit, the greatest mission that anyone could have in this world is raising children as they should. That's the most important thing. And that is something which, oftentimes people look at others to see what if someone else gives something value, then that must be what's truly valuable. What the Torah teaches us is to see what's actually truly valuable. And the greatest merit that one can have is raising a child. And for a Jewish mother to raise a Jewish child in the spirit of Judaism, that's the most important thing. Now, this doesn't mean that women should not be joining the workforce. This doesn't mean they need to stay at home. What it does mean is that they should recognize that they are tasked. A mother is tasked with the greatest responsibility and the greatest privilege. The most important thing, which is ensuring Jewish continuity. There's nothing that can be greater than that, and therefore, should try that any conflict with that shouldn't that if joining the workforce because you're pursuing a career is in conflict with raising children properly, giving your children the time necessary, then if you need to have your priorities straight as to what is truly deserving of your limited time. And that's something which and ultimately in Judaism, unlike in many other religions, which space is the center of Judaism? What's the most important space for Jewish life?
Stage.
What would you say? What's the most important space for Jewish life? Is it Jerusalem? Is it the synagogue? Is it the grocery store?
Stage.
Hmm? Which which space is most essential for Jewish life? So the center of Jewish life is the home, right? Everything else is supplementary to that. And the unit which is most essential for Jewish life is not community, it's the family. Now, the community definitely helps, but the family is the most important part, and that is why, and the greatest way which Judaism is transmitted is through the home being the center of Jewish life, elevating everything that Judaism is not just for the times that we're in a holy space, but even when we're living in normal life, a mundane life, that can also be done in a holy way. And those are things which Jewish women have the strongest influence on. Um, so, Jill, if you'd like to read this.
The women, as the Acaris Habayis, is
Akaras
primary.
Abayis, Akaras Abayis literally translates as the foundation of the home.
Is primarily engaged in the affairs of the home. Her central concern is watching over the ways of her household. It should be openly visible that the home is directed by an Acaris Habayis, whose inner heart is a tabernacle and sanctuary for God, and whose conduct follows Torah guidance, expressed in the behavior of all members of the household, husband and children alike, whose actions, speech, and thoughts become permeated with the mission of creating a dwelling place for him. Through the activity of Jewish women, each making her private home a tabernacle and sanctuary for God, light radiates from that home into the entire world. In this way, the ultimate intention of the giving of the Torah is fulfilled, to bring peace to the world and to make this entire world a dwelling place for God in the lower realms.
Meaning in our literal life, right? You don't need to be in a spiritual space in order to be living Jewish, but in the home, you can live Jewish, and that's how we see especially the mission of Jewish women. And there's three foundational mitzvahs which we say are unique to Jewish, especially the role of Jewish women, although they're not uniquely not uniquely applicable to Jewish women, but they're especially the role of Jewish women because they are the three things which are the foundation of the home. And those three mitzvahs actually are are hinted to in the name of Chana, who we're speaking about as a prototype of the foundation of a Jewish home. Her name is spelled of three letters. Chana is Chet. Let's see over here. Um, Chana is the three. It's spelled Ches Nun Yud, and the three mitzvahs are Chala, Nida, and Hadlaka, or in other words, Chala. The mitzvah of challah is not just baking, not the mitzvah of baking challah actually, but when one bakes dough, one has to take off small part of it, separate that. But in general, it refers to all the laws of kosher and nida, which is the mitzvah of family purity, going to the mikvah, as well as the third one is hadlaka, hadlaka saneros, which is kindling Shabbat and holiday candles. And those are the three mitzvahs which are the foundation of the Jewish home. Alan, if you'd like to read this over here.
Okay. The three letters of the name Chana signify the three commandments given specifically and primarily to the women of Israel: Chala, Nida, and Hadlakas. These three, the sanctity of food, kashrut, family purity, and the lighting of the Shabbos and festive candles, represent the three central pillars upon which the Jewish home and family life are built. They were specifically granted to the Jewish woman, the foundation of the home, who bears the extraordinary responsibility and merit of establishing and leading the Jewish home.
Thank you. Beautiful. And that's the end of this section. So we had three aspects we focused on. One was so yeah, throughout going back, we first spoke about how women have more naturally are in tune with faith. They have a wisdom or intuition, and then they are also the foundation of the home. And those three together they're not three separate things, rather three things that can come together, expressing something deeper, which is how we can look beyond the immediate and see something deeper. C, how godliness can be brought into how godliness should be brought into everything. That's a faith. How it can be brought into anything and you don't take things for face value, but see the underlying goodness and try to bring that into reality, and that is intuition. And how and actually making that transformation, that is being the foundation of the home, and also being the cornerstone, passing it on to the next generation. Those are all things which are essential to that Karas Habayis, the Jewish woman, and that is why, actually, um, that's what one of the reasons why there are certain mitzvos, certain commands which are only men are commanded with those, not women. For example, the mitzvah command of putting on tefillin daily. It's in general positive commands that are time bound. So, putting on tefillin or tzitzis, Torah study, etc. Now, not that women shouldn't be studying Torah, but the obligation to spend every moment in Torah study is unique to men. Now, why is that? Seemingly, these commandments are so important. They're mitzvahs. They're opportunities to connect Almighty. So why did he say that women don't have to do that? And the answer is because they have something which is more essential, more important, which is to raise the next generation of next generation of Jews. And any mitzvah which is time bound, meaning that you need to you can't just push it off to a later time. So such a mitzvah will, by definition, at times take away from the dedication to their most important and greatest merit, which is raising the next generation. And that is why the Torah was taught to women first, because in order for it to be carried on, it can't just be an intellectual pursuit, but a living reality, which is something which women excel at, and something which men can definitely take inspiration from the woman on how to bring it into our lives on a regular basis. Okay. So that's where we're at. And that was really a beautiful, beautiful exploration, I think. I definitely learned a lot from this class. Although, of course, there is so much more to be studied. I'll just point out there's a beautiful book that was recently published by the Kahat Publication Society called Eshet Chayil, A Woman of Valor, which there it goes, basing itself on the Ode to Jewish Woman, the Ode to Woman, the Eshes Chayil of King Solomon, actually goes through the stories of, I don't know, 20 some Jewish women throughout history, connecting each one to a verse and saying the lessons that we could learn, the life story of each of those and the lessons that can be learned. It's a beautiful book. And if you want to explore more, the lesson that can be learned from Jewish women, I would definitely recommend that's where you can go. Anyway, this was great.